She belongs to that generation of writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder and Leroy Jones, Mary Baraka, to whom she was married, who were not only makers, artists, people trying to practice that thing, but were people who were agents of the transformation of the culture for all of us, I think. And so that's certainly part of the interest of her life, and she's recorded that part of her life in two books, the first of which was first published in 1969, and it's been reissued recently. It's called Memoirs of a Beatnik, and I think the title was pure marketing, and from the time, and it was published first by Olympia Press in Paris, which was the wicked press that published sexual books of literary value like Lolita by Nabokov and Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn by Henry Miller and Pauline Réage's infamous Story of O, and so on. And in fact, I bought it thinking it was a very daring and sexual book, and in fact, it is a daring book in some ways, but it's really an interesting history of the inside of that wild world seen from a woman's point of view in ways that are really interesting. And a sort of thing to say about Diane is the way in which all of the avant-garde movements of the 20th century have been boys' clubs. That when you think about them, you think about Kerouac and Ginsberg and William Burroughs, to some extent Gary Snyder and Philip Whalen, the San Francisco poets. But with each of those movements, the modernist movement, Pound, Eliot, and so on, there was also Gertrude Stein and Hilda Doolittle and Marianne Moore. And in the 30s, with the objectivist poets, there was George Oppen and Charles Reznikov and Luz Dukowski. There was also Lorraine Niedecker, that important writer. And with poets of the New York School, there was, when people think of them, they think Frank O'Hara, John Ashbery, Kenneth Koch, James Schuyler. There was also Barbara Guest, among others. And I think it's also been true of the Beat generation, that the story has been the story of the guys and not the story of the women. And several women, but chiefly Diane di Prima and Joanne Kiger, who read for us last semester, have told that other side of the story. And some of that telling, besides being in what's in Memoirs of a Beatnik, is in her biography. I think this is going to be the first volume, Recollections of My Life as a Woman. It's really fun to read and so smart, published a few years ago. So that's those are the books that tell some of the social story. She was born of Italian-American parents. Her grandfather was an Italian anarchist who came to this country, was involved with Emma Goldman and with the revolutionary tradition, which meant unions, birth control, the 8-hour working day, and other radical proposals. You know those bumper stickers that say, brought to you by the folks who invented the weekend, the labor movement, you know? She came out of that world, and she decided to be a poet at 14. In Greenwich Village, she met Leroy Jones, a young middle-class black poet who was on his way to becoming a Mary Baraka and force in the black arts movement. And for 10 years, in the 60s, they edited a literary magazine a mimeograph magazine that I used to read in the basement of City Light's bookstore called Floating Bear. So she was a terrific force in that way as a publisher. And during that time, she was writing mostly the political poems that have recently been recollected in the book called Revolutionary Letters. These poems, a lot of them are in the style of, I would say, the style of Allen Ginsberg, of that kind of new 1950s raw, open, let's talk about directly free verse. I give you a sample. Revolutionary Letter number 16, we are eating up the planet. The New York Times takes a forest every Sunday. Los Angeles draws its water from the Sacramento Valley. The rivers of British Columbia are ours on lease for 90 years. Every large factory is an infringement of our God-given right to light and air, to clean and flowing rivers stocked with fish, to the very possibility of life for our children's children. We'll have to look carefully, i.e., do we really need electricity, and at what 1965. Do we really need electricity, and at what cost in natural resource, human resource? Do we need cars when petroleum pumped from the earth poisons the land around for 100 years? Pumped from the car poisons the hard-pressed cities? Or try this statistic. The U.S. has 5% of the world's people, uses over 50% of the world's goods. Our garbage holds matter for survival for uncounted underdeveloped nations, right? This was when gas was 30 cents a gallon. She was writing those poems. She moved to San Francisco and made a kind of transformation from being a sort of revolutionary socialist anarchist poet through feminism and her studies of Zen and Tibetan Buddhism into writing and studies, scholarly studies in the visionary traditions in Western literature and Tibetan literature. And out of that came the book that is her really great poetic testament, which is Loba. It's a visionary feminist account of, that's quite another thing from the visionary letters. And here, folks, among us is Diane di Prima.
You know, everybody says, oh, or I don't know what people said today here at the introduction. I will hear it perhaps someday, but people say beat poet, and that was a very long time ago, and it was like a very short time, although it seemed like forever. Because I started writing seriously when I was 14, which was in 48, and I dropped out of school by 51 and got out of that whole thing and just wrote. So I'm going to read a couple of beat stuffs and a couple of later stuffs and then move on to more recent work. My work tends to go in very long series that seem to go on forever. One is Revolutionary Letters, which began in the late 60s. I'm still writing them. One is Loba, which began in 71, and more of it keeps happening. There was Loba that came out in 78. Twice as much Loba came out in 98. And there's a whole bunch more that I brought unpublished parts that I thought I'd read from today, too. There are these various, I don't tend to lump them all in the same book. Robert Duncan would have passages, one of his kinds of work, in each book. But I tend to have a book that's Revolutionary Letters, a book that's Loba, and so on. But they keep getting added to. And I don't understand that too well. But the earlier work is the earlier work, and I'll just read a little of it. This is, these first pieces were written when I was between 19 and 23, and they were called they're from a book called This Kind of Bird Flies Backward. This little section was called More or Less Love Poems. And if you read about the 50s, you know that we were so busy being cool that we didn't know how to say the word love, among other things. So here's a love poem. For you, I would no longer pick my so pickable nose or bite my delicious nails. For you, I would fix my teeth and buy a mattress. For you, I would kill my favorite roach that lives in the woodwork by the drawing table. That was a love poem. Another love poem from that period. You bet your life, next bedtime, I'll get even. I'll call your name wrong, and you'll think it happened accidental. I was a very nice little 18-year-old woman to be friends with, you know, I mean. I'm not going to go far in that because I want to get on, but this one written around that time was for my first baby. I wanted a child. It was 1956. I didn't want a man. I asked various of my lovers, and they were horrified. So I stopped asking. And this was, I guess I was about maybe 5 or 6 months pregnant when I wrote this for my first daughter, who's now 50, actually. And it's called Song for Baby-O, Unborn. Sweetheart, when you break through, you'll find a poet here, not quite what one would choose. I won't promise you'll never go hungry, or that you won't be sad on this gutted, breaking globe. But I can show you, baby, enough to love, to break your heart forever. I still get letters from young women about that poem, like about many of those early ones, actually. So moving on, in the 60s, I became more interested in what was going on within my head, the stretching out of the line, the following everything instead of cutting it down to the most sparse. And I think at that point, I stopped so much being whatever the beat was. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is. There's a beat that is just the sense of pushing at the edges of consciousness all the time, and I guess one never gets past that if one's a poet of certain kinds. There's a beat that's more down home and dirty, writing the language of the streets, which is interesting, but it isn't my whole path. Or Ginsberg would say, only what's before your eyes, only write about what you can see, but that's not me either. So that beat is what, I don't know. Anyway, here's a love poem from the early 60s. From a book called The New Handbook of Heaven, which I wrote for Leroy Jones, who I had a child with, Amiri Baraka. The beach. Where I ship out from, the tides give no indication. Washing dead flowers under the rocks at my back, the houses flat and implacable, painted green. It peels. The walls are damp. The chill at the railroad station in the mornings, always the dawn light and wind, our collars turned up, the suitcases broken, a gesture, almost empty. Ourselves, the pitiful gray of no baths, no sleep, the gray we rub off the sheets in the green houses. Did we lock the door? The sea is gold in the dawn light, the rocks silhouetted against it. How many years will you amble along the shore, hands in your pockets, whistling the same old tune, living on soft-shelled crabs, the sea floor hard under your clean, bare feet? Just as I caught the train, I think I saw you, shuffling to the horizon to stamp it flat. That was before the picnic basket fell open, and my choice, my monster lobster, walked back home. There were shorter ones too that from that time, but mostly they were more like that. I'll read a short one called The Numbers Racket. When you take no for an answer, will you look any different? Will you get pale behind your glasses? Will you go backwards with that funny step? Will you straighten your jacket? I mean, are you taking it now, taking no for an answer? Did this thing just go off? Yeah. So somebody can put it on again. The magician, whoever it was, who put it on in the first place. And much stuff happened in the 60s, in the early poems of the 60s and the later poems. At some point, I began to write what became the revolutionary letters. What happened was somebody in New York hired a flatbed truck, Sam Abrams, a poet, and a generator that would run an amplifier and we went out, some folk singers who were considered very radical, and guerrilla theater people who did street theater, and poets, and we went all over New York. This was those years of assassinations around 67, 68, and so on. Not the first ones, the second wave of assassinations. And we would just perform places, and I realized the poems I had mostly were too intellectual for that kind of performing, so I started to write things that were more something you could hear on one hearing on the street, something more like guerrilla theater, even though it was poetry. And they became the Revolutionary Letters, and I'm still writing them, as I said, and I'm looking for their book right now that just came out with recent ones, but while I'm looking for it, I think I'm going to... Okay, here it is. The early ones, I mean all of them, but the early ones were clearly just a one-time punch, and that was it. People could hear them and would do whatever they wanted with it. I'm anarchist. My grandfather on my mother's side was an anarchist who wrote with Carlo Tresca for his newspaper, and I tended to have that way with my politics. I never joined anything, but I wrote lots and put it out there to be used however. And I'm looking for one that particularly works for this kind of thing, but if I don't find it, I'll give you another one quickly. Here's one that'll do. It was an early one. We're talking now, I started those in New York with the flatbed truck, but by 68, I was on the West Coast working with the diggers, delivering free food, and reading on the steps of City Hall at noon every day to persuade people to drop out of their jobs. Among other things, I would read these with Peter Coyote would play music, and other people were doing things with masks and whatever. So this is around 69. Can you own land? Can you own house? Own rights to others' labor, stocks or factories, or money loaned at interest? What about the yield of same? Crops, autos, airplanes dropping bombs. Can you own real estate so others pay you rent? To whom does the water belong? To whom will the air belong as it gets rarer? The American Indians say that a man can own no more than he can carry away on his horse. So there were a lot of those. They would go out to something called the Liberation News Service, which would send them to 200 revolutionary underground papers all over the country. And people would print what they wanted, and this went on every week or so, and eventually I put out a book of them in 1970 with City Lights. And each time there was a new book, I added the new ones. So I'm going to read one more. It has, of course, the language of the day, so man is innocent and beautiful instead of humans, but also there's a rhythm you have to worry about too. So this is, who is the we? Who is the they in this thing? Did we or they kill the Indians? Not me. My people brought here cheap labor to exploit a continent for them. Did we or they exploit it? Do you admit complicity? Say, we have to get out of Vietnam. We have to get out of Iraq. We really should stop poisoning the water, etc. Look closer. Look again. Secede. Declare your independence. Don't accept a share of the guilt they want to lay on us. Man is innocent and beautiful and born to perfect bliss they envy. Heavy deeds make heavy hearts, and to them life is suffering. Stand clear. So there were a lot of those, and they were written for a long time. They're still being written. And rather than try to go back toward the end, I'll read you some. This edition just came out in last fall, Last Gas Press, and has 23 poems that weren't in the last edition. Each time we would add the new ones, as I said. I'll read a couple of these. Some are long, and I'm going to read a couple of short, newish ones. February 14th, 2001. So this was pre-9/11, but February 14th, 2001. Someone put out a flag for Valentine's Day, as if the domain of the heart could belong to this heartbroken nation. This one is called Les Américains. We are feral. I was watching, at that point, it was October of 2001. I was on the road, and I was watching basic television, which was all I had in my cheap room at somewhere in New Jersey. And I was watching these people escaping or trying to escape from Afghanistan just before the bombing started. Their faces, that was all we saw. Les Américains. We are feral, rare as mountain wolves. Our hearts are pure and stupid. We go down, pitted against our own. Another one, brief one. There are nice longer ones, but I want to go on. Called Ancient History. The women are lying down in front of the bulldozers, sent to destroy the last of the olive groves. So, skipping back a little, we got 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to go just... So then there were the 70s, and then there were the 80s, and all through the 70s, I began to write Loba, which I didn't know what it was, in 1971. Loba means a she-wolf, and I thought it was first I thought it was this one-page poem, then I thought it was this eight-page poem. Luckily, there was this guy I was married to who was a poet, Grant Fisher, who said, I don't think that poem is finished. You might be on the lookout if it shows up again. And 30-something years later, books 1 and 2 add up to 300 and some pages only because Penguin wouldn't print the rest, and there's a lot more. And the she-wolf is like women and myths of various animals and myths from various other things, but I wasn't interested ever in the myth for its own sake. It was only if it was something that had actually torn up my life or impinged on my life, or been part of how I had to figure things out, then I would work the myth into the poem, or the myth would arrive. Love is something I can't make happen. It just arrives when it arrives. It first arrived when I was in the middle of teaching a class. Actually, I was in Salinas with a poet who spoke Spanish. We were working with the kids in the school from there was barbed wire all around the school and cops all over campus. They were the kids of the immigrant workers down there. And all of a sudden I hear these lines in my head, and I sort of let Elias Ruski y Cortez take over the class. I just stepped back and started, because when I hear lines in my head, if I don't write them down, I don't hear anything else until I write those lines down. So what was happening was this. I'll just read the very beginning. If he did not come apart in her hands, he fell like flint on her ribs. There was no middle way. The rocks screamed in the flowing water, stars dizzy with pain. If he was not daisies in her soup, he was another nettle in her hair. She stumbled crazy over the stony path between slanderous trees. Even field mice knew she called the shots. Dimensions of the obsidian cross he hung on, singing in the sun. Her eyes cloudy with nightmare, she grinned, baring her wolf's teeth. So then you go back and you give another exercise and you talk, and this thing keeps going on, and it went on about 8 little early parts that day. And then the last of those, that particular session, was a repeat of the first. It was, if you do not come apart like bread in her hands, She falls like flint on your heart. The flesh knows better than the spirit what the soul has eyes for. Has she sunk root in your watering place? Does she look with her wolf's eyes out of your head? And that was part of part one. Part one ended with a poem that was kind of Shiva-like, when Shiva dances and the universe disperses. I won't read all of it, but I'll read the beginning. The loba dances. She raises in flames the city. It glows about her. The loba, mother wolf and mistress of many, dances. She treads in the severed heads that grow like mosses on the flood. The city melts. It flows past her treading white feet and ends something like, the loba dances. She treads the salty earth. She does not raise breath cloud heavenward. Her breath itself is carnage. At that point I thought loba was done, but it turned out I was wrong. It turned out I was this much wrong, plus whatever's here and whatever's in the outtakes and all the rest of it. But it went through many stages and I don't have very much time, so I'm going to go here and there. This is from one of the next, but still early parts. It is still news to her that passion could steer her wrong. Though she went down 1,000 times, strung out across railroad tracks, off bridges, under cars, or stiff glass bottles still in hand, hair soft on greasy pillow, still it is news she cannot follow love, his burning footsteps in blue crystal snow, and still come out all right. Another one from that section. She strides in blue jeans to the corner bar. She dances with the old women. The men light up, they order wine. Hair sawdust is flying under her feet. Her sneakers thudding soft. Her wispy hair falls sometimes into her face. Were it not for the ring of fur around her ankles, just over her bobby socks, you'd never know. There's no one would ever guess her name. And then it goes on and it enters into myth at some point. And at some point in the entering into myth, various myths come up that, as I said, they really felt like they had to have shaken or owned me at some point. And then I was also doing exercises in the schools with the kids. I was on the road for the NEA from 71 to 78, all over the country. They didn't know how to find poets in Wyoming, so they would import them from the West Coast or the East Coast, like cheese, you know. So I was imported into Wyoming, into Montana. I worked a lot on the Indian reservations in Arizona. After a while, they found out that there were people there writing poems, but it took them about 8 years. And I learned a lot about the middle of the country. Anyway, this is an exercise, I think it was a Kenneth Koch exercise that I turned into. Some lies about the loba. That she is eternal, that she sings, that she is star-born, that she gathers crystal, that she can be confused with Isis, that she is the goal, that she knows her name, that she swims in the purple sky, that her fingers are pale and strong, that she is black, that she is white, that you always know who she is when she appears, that she strides on battlements, that she sifts like stones in the sea, that you can hear her approach, that her jeweled feet tread any particular measure, that there is anything about her which can be said, that she relishes tombstones, falls down marble stairs, that she is ground only, that she is not ground, that you can remember the first time you met, that she is always with you, that she can be seen without grace, that there is anything to say of her which is not truth. And longer and short. I wish I had more hours, but we'll just jump along here. This poem later in Loba has two titles. The Loba addresses the goddess, or the poet, as priestess, addresses the Loba goddess. It's kind of a grouchy poem. Grouchy at the goddess, it's called. Is it not in your service that I wear myself out, running ragged among these hills, driving children to forgotten movies? In your service, broom and pen, the monstrous feasts we serve each other on the outer porch. Inside the house, there is only rice and salt. And we wear exhaustion like a painted robe, I and my sisters, wresting the goods from the niggardly dying fathers, healing each other with water and bitter herbs. That when we stand naked in the circle of lamps, beside the small water in the inner grove, we show no blemish, but also no superfluous beauty. It has burned off in watches of the night. O newt, O mantle of stars, we catch at you, lean, ragged, mournful, triumphant, shaggy as grass. Our skins ache of emergence, dark of the moon. I'm going to go toward the end and read a little bit, not much, and then maybe read one of the unpublished ones. This one is long. There's a series in one of the late parts. The Loba that Penguin did has the kindness to have a table of contents, which helps so you know when one poem ends and another begins, because I don't title most of them. But this particular section has a lot of, 3 or 4 at least, poems that are to and about or for the street women in my neighborhood. I was living in the Western Addition in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was a really tough time there. And there was a lot of crack, a lot of hookers, a lot of gunshots, a lot of all that. And these were to some of those women, especially the younger ones. I'm going to read one of them. It's called Medusa Gazebo. Blue babies birthing, a thrown-away corsage, orchids for Halloween, the Day of the Dead. She is fair brown flesh for sale for low bidders in plaid jackets, vaunting new age, patriotism of ghoul and shadow country. Don't go too near the edge, I want to tell her. I whisper it to her 1,000 tiny braids knotted at her neck. She bends her head, looks at her cold tortillas, decides to eat no more. There's a section that is adaptations of poems, hymns by Ram Prasad, hymns to Kali, that I had worked on years before and finished for a section of Loba. I'm making a section now that's going to be longish monologues by each of the early, very early Japanese women writers. We seem to tend to think of them each as alike, but their vocabulary they're seeing is each different. Their work is so small, each poem. I'm making somehow, I hope, some longer monologues. I'm hoping to go visit some places in Japan before I do that, but my body doesn't like to move, so I will see. Meanwhile, I'm going to read one of the Kali ones. So this is hymns to Kali, but it's also hymns to Tara, who Ramprasad. Actually, I found these because Ramakrishna was very popular in the 60s, and he was very much a devotee of Ramprasad, whose hymns are still sung in India, I understand. I'm going to read the last one. Ramprasad is complaining at his bhakti religion. The deity is everything. Your lover, your child, your mother, your father, your everything. And you can also yell at them and complain them and all them. That. I'll read the last two. The 6 systems of philosophy do not grasp her. She drinks devotion. She abides in bliss. At dawn, she waits in your most secret chamber. Yogini, lost in the ecstasy of love. She draws the lover as the lodestone iron. And the last one, his complaint in this batch anyway. The day will pass, this day will pass, only our story will remain. And generations of men will know your unkindness, Tara. I have come to the world market, I have shopped. I wait at the landing, the sun is setting. Mother, take me into the boat. The boatman fills his ship with the rich. I am left behind. He asks for his fare, but I have no money. Oh, stony-hearted woman, pay my way. The boat has left. The sun is going down. I begin to swim in the ocean, chanting your name. Well, I believe we are out of time. If we stretched it, we have 5 minutes. Do we want that 5 minutes, or should we? Okay, I have 2 things I want to do. I don't think I can do them both. Oh, I hate this. I hate this part of life where you have to make choices. Okay, I'm going to read one poem from the New Loba stuff. And this is part of book 3. There's more to book 2 than fit in there because they said 285 pages. I got away with 335, but there's more of book 2 in my computer. And this is the beginning of book 3. And this poem is called Babylon to R.D. R.D. is Robert Duncan. And it starts with a quote from him. Fathered in the light and heat of one's sun. And I want to say that we used to argue he could not conceive of light without warmth. And for me, I could conceive of both a cold light and etc. Anyway, and there's some Grail references in here, but you'll get them or not. Babylon to R.D. Fathered in the light and heat of one sun. And its necessary coldness, fat of the earth, water and earth of fire. In that light, wrapping my visible form as in a shawl, knit out of darkness by a mad ant. And so wrapped, wielding the candelabra the knight in the old story holds in his left hand, after he dreams he stole it from a chapel, himself on the bier. So wrapped in cold light, as in a rich shawl, wielding the candlestick crossed over from the dream, I, even I, self upon self, am she, old father. See, I am the woman who stands in the black sun. There's a ton of more Loba. And then there's a book that I wrote all in one night called Time Bomb, a couple of weeks after Katrina, which I won't get to, I don't think. And then there's another book I'm typing up called The Black Notebook. I take these little spiral notebooks with me when I go to hear jazz or other music, and they fill up with poems, because I can write in the dark, thanks to my mother who turned the light out every night. I'll just read a couple of these. There are millions of them. Break camp or leave it as it is for whoever comes this way. This Philip Whalen's memorial. Phil had the best painkillers. Fried chicken and wine. There's tryptophan in chicken. This is the last I'll read. The crystal, he held it, never stops reflecting, doesn't get tired. He turned it, caught the light, replaced it in a bowl of rice. His hands trembled slightly. Okay, I think we'll stop there. Thank you. Oh, I can announce, if I may, every year I do a solo reading to open Diva Fest, which is this 10-day festival at this tiny little, funky little experimental theater in San Francisco called Exit Theater. And it's in the afternoon. I think it's April 12th this year. And it's a 2-hour thing in the afternoon, and I just read and answer questions for 2 hours. So. And this, every year it's been a theme. 1 year was Loba, 1 year it was Revolution, 1 year it was alchemy poem, all my alchemy poems, which have never been gathered. And this year I'm going to do more or less love poems to plants, to cats, to people, to aliens, to archangels, whatever. So you can find Exit Theater, I'm sure, on the Google if you want it. But I just wanted you to know. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here. Please make sure to sign our mailing list and check out the books for sale.